Hello, everybody. Pew, pew, pew. We're back. We are back. Hello, 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 hello. Happy Thursday. Thursday, right? What's new with everybody? Everybody doing well, I hope. I got a package yesterday. I opened it up and it looked like... Make sure my address is on the other side so I'm not doxing myself. It looked like this. What are those? Do you know? Do you know? Oh, yeah. So it says Carolina Reaper and Sichuan Heat inside one extremely hot tortilla chip. 2020, so it's the new one. And on the back, there's a big old warning. Do not eat if you are sensitive to spicy foods, allergic to peppers, nightshades, or capsaicin, or are pregnant or have any medical conditions. Any medical conditions. Keep out of reach of children. After touching the chip, wash your hands with soap and do not touch your eyes or other sensitive areas. Seek medical assistance should you experience difficulty breathing, fainting, or extended nausea. The Reaper shows no mercy. There's one chip. It is 30 calories, no protein. And then ingredients: blue corn, sunflower and or safflower oil, Carolina Reaper pepper, so that's third, scorpion chili pepper is 4, salt, charcoal powder, chipotle pepper powder, Sichuan pepper extract. Nice. So I'm not going to have one today, but we will be doing that soon. Blue corn. It became a fad here in the U.S. in, what, the 90s? It's just corn. It's just a slightly different color. So, like, blue corn chips were all the rage in the 90s. It's not as noticeable these days, but... Yes. So we'll see if any of the Homebuddies are going to join me in partaking of those chips. That would be fun. We'll find out. Let's see. Cool. Yeah, I heard that people watched the Warhammer RPG last night. I did not get a chance to tune in, but I'll catch up eventually. Oh, Mom, they just went on sale 2 days ago on the website. And these got here in 1 day. So they came very quickly. Yeah, I didn't have to have you go to a specific store out in Rochester to pick them up for me this time. And I should say that I am hosting the Homebuddies group stream this Saturday, but we will not be doing these. Not this time. Hopefully soon, but it won't be this Saturday. So don't get your hopes up for that. I think I'm gonna have to talk some people into it. Oh, pixelated. Yeah. Yeah, the rate dropped down. It should come back up. It hasn't done that in a while. Stable now. Okay. No, Mom, these are actually they changed the recipe a little bit, apparently. So it'll be interesting to see the difference. They added a secondary source of heat to them. It should be getting better, right? Checking out yes, my 8-bit mode. Alright. The numbers are much better now. Excuse me. Okay. Ovid. Metamorphoses. Metamorphoses. So we heard about the flood. We heard about some ladies and Jupiter loving on those ladies. We are in book 2. And Phaethon, right? Phaethon is a young man. He is told by his mother that he is the son of the sun god. His friends, his silly schoolyard buddies, don't believe him. He goes to his mom, begs his mom, tell me, I need proof. I'm sorry to hear that, Rubin Wombat. Is it like a drone strike happening, or just a regular airplane? So Phaethon goes and he meets his father, the sun god. And the sun god says, "Oh, I love you so much. Anything you want will be yours." And as we know, it's bad news when you promise something without the details. And his son said, "Cool, thanks, Dad. Let me borrow the car." And Dad says, "No. Could I take back the promise? This is the only thing I would deny you. It's dangerous." And then Phaethon's like, "Nope, that's what I want." And the sun god says, "Oh, okay, look, it's really bad. It's really scary out there. I'm the only one who can do this. Not even Jupiter could drive this. You got to go up. You got to go across. There's all this crazy stuff. But choose more wisely." So his warning ended and did no good, as Phaethon insisted on what he first had asked, to drive the chariot. All that the father could do was keep him waiting, but he finally consented, led him down to where the chariot stood, the work of Vulcan, axle and pole of gold, and tires of gold, and spokes of silver, and along the yoke chrysolites shone, and every kind of jewel gave back the bright reflection. And the boy was marveling at the craftsmanship when, look you, Aurora, watcher of the rosy morning, opened the crimson portals, and the courtways all full of roses, and the stars were gone, whom Lucifer, last of all to leave the heaven, marshaled along the way. So basically, dawn is breaking. Here it is. The sun god saw him, saw the world redden, and the moon's thin crescent vanished from sight, and bade the speedy hours to yoke the horses, and they did so quickly, leading them from the lofty stalls with fire breathed from the nostrils, and well fed on juices of rich ambrosial fodder. Then the harness was put in place, and the sun god, for protection, touched his son's face with holy medication, put on the radiant diadem, and sighed from his foreboding heart, and said, "At least, my son, perhaps you can obey a father's warning. Go easy on the whip, hard on the reins. They need no urging. The trouble is to hold them. Do not cut straight through the 5 zones of heaven. The course runs on a slant, a middle pathway missing the north and south. Follow the wheel tracks. You will see them clearly. Sky and earth both need equal degrees of heat. Too low you burn the one, too high the other. The middle is safest. Beware on the right the writhing of the serpent. Beware on the left the dangerous sunken altar. Keep between both. The rest I leave to fortune to help you, and to give you, or I hope so, better direction than you give yourself. And now, while I am talking, dewy night has reached her goal in the west. We cannot linger. Our call is on us. Look, the dawn is glowing, the shadows gone. Here, take the reins and hold them. Or better still, there still is time. Be taking my counsel, not my chariot. Let me light the world, and you stand there on solid ground and watch in safety." So he has one last desperate plea to his son. Please don't go. He puts on his son. He puts on his face the holy medication, so it's like divine sunscreen. Man, the spam phone calls have just been crazy the last couple of days. Gives him the diadem and tells him, "Okay, here's just some last minute advice on how to steer the chariot. But could you please not go? Could you please just stay here?" But while he was talking, the boy was in the car and stood there proudly, holding the reins, all happiness, and thanking his father for the gift he gave unwilling. Meanwhile, the horses Pyrrhus, Eus, Aethon, and Phlegon filled the air with neighing, snorting, and pawing at their bars. And Tethys, ignorant of her grandson's fate, let fall the barriers. They had their chance at heaven, the horses now, and took it, and their hoofs, not hooves, cut through the clouds before them, and their wings bore them aloft, and they overtook the winds that rose from the same east. But the weight was light, not such as they were used to. Phaethon does not weigh as much as his father. And the yoke without its usual pressure, so as schooners unballasted careen and roll and yaw out of the proper course, so the bright chariot tosses and bounds as if there were no driver. It did not take the horses long to know it, to run away beyond control. The driver, in panic, does not know in which direction to turn the reins, does not know where the road is, and even if he knew, he could do nothing with those wild, plunging animals. The bear, the constellation, for the first time in all his life grew hot and tried in vain to seek forbidden oceans for coolness, and the serpent near the pole, torpid and harmless with the chill upon him, burned into angry fury, and the plough ox, clumsy and tame in the shafts of his heavy wagon, went dashing off in terror. From the heaven the unhappy boy looked down. Far, far below him he saw the lands, and he grew pale. His knees trembled beneath him, and the darkness came into his eyes from too much light. He wishes he had never touched those horses of his father. To have learned his birth was nothing. To have gained by pleading now seems worse than loss. He might be the son of Merops. He would be even eager to have them call him so. But he is born like a ship before a gale, unsteered, unmastered, abandoned to the gods in useless praying. What should he do? Much of the sky behind him, much more is still ahead. Imagination measures them both, and his eyes, at times, look forward to the west he will not reach. Again look back eastward, and he is dazed and stunned and dazzled, and neither drops the reins or really holds them. He does not know the horses' names, and terror is doubled, tripled, as he sees around him strange figures in the sky and savage beasts. The scorpion, for instance, arms outreaching in two half circles, and the other members spread over infinite acres, and black poison stinking and rank, and the threatening curved stinger. Out of his senses, with cold fear upon him, Phaethon dropped the reins. And when the horses feel them across their backs, and none to check them, bolting, they charge the air of unknown regions, wherever impulse hurls them, lawless, crashing against high stars. They keep the chariot bounding through pathless ways, and now high, now low, toward heaven, or plunging sheer toward earth. The moon, in wonder, watches her brother's horses running lower than her own steeds. The scorched clouds smoke, the mountains of earth catch fire, the prairies crack, the rivers dry up, the meadows are white hot, the trees, the leaves, burn to a crisp. The crops are tinder. I grieve at minor losses. The great cities perish, and their great walls, and nations perish with all their people. Everything is ashes. The wood and mountains burn, Athos and Taurus, Tmolus and Oite. All the springs of Ida dry up, and Helicon, home of the Muses. Haemus and Etna blaze, twin-peaked Parnassus, and Eryx, Cynthus, Othrys. The snow is gone from Rhodope at last. Dindima, Mimas, Mycale burn, and holiest Kithaeron. The cold cannot save Scythia, whose landmark, Caucasus, burns, and Ossa burns, and Pindus, and Mount Olympus, greater than both together. The Alps, the cloud-topped Apennines, are burning. And Phaethon sees the earth on fire. He cannot endure the heat, the blast of some great furnace. Under his feet he feels the chariot glowing white hot. He cannot bear the sparks, the ashes, the soot, the smoke, the blindness. He is going somewhere, that much he knows, but where he is he does not know. They may have their way, the horses. Whew. So it's real bad. He gets up too high. He sees he gets freaked out by the constellations, these actual manifestations of creatures up in the sky, especially the scorpion. And then he drops the reins, and that's the end of everything. It's getting too low. It's starting to scorch mountaintops, forests, cities, until at last. And Phaethon sees the... Oh, no, I said that way already. Oh, and then we get some, remember, Metamorphoses. So we need to hit up some changes in these stories. And that was when, or so men think, the people of Africa turned black, since the blood was driven by that fierce heat to the surface of their bodies. And Libya was desert, and the nymphs mourned for their pools and fountains. And the rivers, wide though they might have been, had no more safety. The dawn was smoking, and the Eurymanthus and Xanthus, who would know a second burning in years to come, the serpentine Meander, yellow Lycurmus, Thracian Melis, perish, and Sparta sees Eurotas burned, Orontes, Thermodon, Danube, Babylon's Euphrates, from Ganges to the golden sands of Tagus, all burning, burning. The Maeonian swans whose melodies were heard along Caster were heard no more, and the Nile fled in terror and hid its head in the earth, and it stays hidden, no man today knows where. The 7 mouths are empty, filled with dust, 7 dry channels. Hebrus and Strymon dry up in the western rivers, the Po, the Rhine, the Rhone, the very Tiber promised dominion all over the world. And remember, this is Roman times, so they know Europe and all of that kind of stuff. The earth gapes open and the light goes down deep into the underworld, whose king and queen blink in their terror of it. Even the ocean shrinks to a plain of sand. The hidden mountains emerge to join the Cyclades. The dolphins dare leap and curve in the high air no longer. The fish dive deep and the dead seals are floating, white-bellied on the surface. The story has it that Nereus and Doris and their daughters found even their deep-sea caverns hot and stifling. Neptune, with scowling countenance, dared lift his arms 3 times above the waves. 3 times he could not bear the fiery air. And Earth, our mother, circled by the ocean amid the waters and shrinking fountains, contracting into her darkness, parched by heat, raised up her stifled face, and put a hand to shield her forehead, and her trembling made everything shudder. She sank down again, lower than ever before, and then she spoke. O greatest of the gods, if this is pleasing and I deserve it, why hold back the lightning? If I must die by fire, then let me perish by fire you send, and lighten the destruction because you are its author. I can hardly... The smoke was suffocating. Open my lips to speak. Look at my hair burned crisp. Look at the ashes in eyes and face. Is this what I am given for being fruitful, dutiful, for bearing the wounds of harrow and plowshare year on year? Is this my due reward for giving fodder to flocks and herds, and corn to men, and incense for the gods' altars? Maybe I deserve it, but what about the ocean and your brother? Neptune's allotted waters ebb and vanish further and further from heaven. Well, never mind him, never mind me, but have a little pity for your own skies. Look! On both sides the poles are smoking. If that fire corrupts the heavens, your palaces will topple. Even Atlas strains and can hardly bear his white-hot burden. If sea and land and sky are lost, we are hurled into the ancient chaos. Save us, Father. Preserve this residue. Take thought. Take counsel for the sum of things. So Earth, who we would know as Gaia from Greek mythology, she actually lifts up her head and she begs Jupiter, what the fuck? What are you doing? Have you decreed that I must die? Then send fire, blast me with lightning bolts, but this is crazy. Everything's burning up. Think about your brother, Neptune, in the ocean. Think about your own skies that are burning. Everything sucks right now. Please. Please. The earth could say no more, so fierce the smothering heat, and she sank deeper into the caverns nearer the world below us. But the Almighty Father called for witness all of the gods, and most of all the sun god, who had given his son the chariot, that all things would perish if he did not help, and quickly. And when he sought the citadel of heaven, its very peak and pinnacle, whence he spreads clouds over the world, and sets his thunder rolling, and hurls his lightning bolts. But now he has no clouds to veil the earth with, and no rainfall. But he makes thunder sound, and poises lightning head high in his right hand, and flings it from him, striking the charioteer. And the bolt smashes his car, his life. So fire extinguished fire, and the mad horses leapt, tore loose the yoke, broke from the broken reins. The axle lies far from the pole, the spokes and wheels are shattered, the wreckage scatters far. And Phaethon, his ruddy hair on fire, falls streaming down the long trail of air. A star sometimes falls from clear heaven, so seems to fall. And far from home, a river god receives him, bathes his poor burning face, and the western naiads give burial to the broken body, smoking with the fire of that forked bolt, and on the stone they carve an epitaph. Here Phaethon lies, who drove his father's chariot. If he did not hold it, at least he fell in splendid daring. I mean, I suppose that's something you could say. Yeah, he's dead. He did. And his poor father, sick at heart, refused to show his countenance, and 1 whole day, or so men say, went without the sun. The fire supplied what light there was. How useful! And the boy's mother, after she had said whatever could be said on such occasions, out of her mind with grief, tearing her bosom, went wandering over the world to find the body, or anyway the bones, and found the bones at last, but buried by a foreign river. She threw herself beside the tomb, her tears fell on the letters graven in the marble where she could read his name, and her arms fondled the gravestone to her breast. And all her daughters joined in their useless ritual of sorrow. By night and day they call upon their brother, who will not hear them ever, and they lie there before the sepulchre. The moon filled and waned and filled 4 times, and in their custom, by now it was a custom, still they sorrowed, wanting to fling herself to earth, and could not, till one day Phaethusa, the oldest daughter, because she made complaint, her feet had stiffened. Lampetia, the fair one, tried to help her, and could not move at all, suddenly rooted in earth. Another sister, tearing her hair, pulled leaves away, and another, found shins and ankles were wood, and arms were branches. And as they looked at these in grief and wonder, bark closed around their loins, their breasts, their shoulders, their hands, but still their lips kept calling, Mother. What could Clymene do but follow impulse, run every which way, try to kiss each daughter, tear loose the bark, break off the little twigs at the fingers' ends? But the broken twigs were bleeding, and each one, wounded, cried, Don't hurt me, mother! This is no tree you are tearing, but my body. Farewell, farewell. And then the bark closed over the last words each one had said, but still their tears kept flowing down, till, hardened in the sunlight, they turned to amber, and the shining river receives them, bears them on to be the jewels of Roman brides hereafter. Ooh. So the story keeps getting sadder and sadder as Phaethon's mom, Clymene, and all of their daughters go to mourn him. And then they cry and cry and cry. They are rooted to the spot and turn into trees. So, yeah. There's a cousin of Phaethon whose name is Cygnus. And if you're familiar with that name, you might guess what happens to him. He weeps, he cries, and then his voice grew thinner, shriller. White feathers hid his hair, and his neck lengthened. A web began to join his ruddy fingers. Wings came along his sides. His lips extended into a blunted beak. What once was Cygnus was a new bird, the swan. So the origin of the swan. And then the sun god says, basically, like, I give up. I don't even want to drive. Somebody else can do it. If anybody else wants to take on this task, go ahead. And as he was speaking, the gods all stood around and pleaded humbly that he should not spread darkness over the world. And even Jove asks pardon for that lightning, adding a royal threat or so. The sun god yokes the two teams again, still wild and trembling, yanks at the bit, cuts with the lash. He blames them, puts all the blame on them for his son's downfall. Yikes. So again, that story at least is all about don't promise things that you don't have the details for. Also, don't overreach. definitely a topic that shows up a lot in ancient mythology. And yeah, you can definitely read into it also the arrogance, the overconfidence of young men wanting to take on anything and everything, basically. Let's see. We have a story called Jove in Arcady. I think we can skip that one. Yeah, just making sure I don't miss anything good. Should we read the story of the raven and the raven's story? So Zenblade, the Romans they took Greek myths and then they changed the names, they updated them. So it was, but yes, the people who lived in ancient Italy were, yeah, this technically is Roman, yes. Ovid was a Roman poet. Okay, so this is the story of the raven and the raven's story. And it starts off with a shocker. Are you ready for this? The raven once was white. In fact, so much so, not snowy doves nor swans were ever whiter, not even the geese, whose latter-day descendants cried out and saved Rome's capital. More on that later. However, he talked too much, the raven, and that was his undoing. Once white, and now white's opposite, the talker brought this upon himself by too much talking. There was a girl, of course, Coronus of Larissa, none prettier in all of Thessaly. Apollo found pleasure in her, surely, just as long as she was chaste, or, anyway, undiscovered. Apollo's bird, however, learned the truth and fluttered off, an incorruptible witness, to tell his master, and a gossiping crow came tagging after, eager for the gossip. But when he heard the reason for the journey, he said, "This is a useless kind of business. Listen to me, I ought to know. Consider what I am now, what I once was, and ask me how merit is rewarded. You will find good faith is ruinous. Once upon a time, a child was born named Erichthonius, a boy without a mother. Pallas hid him in a chest of willow and gave it to 3 girls. Daughters they were of double-bodied Cecrops. And Pallas told the girls to do no looking, no prying into mysteries. I watched them, hiding myself in the leaves of a dark elm tree, to spy what they were up to. 2 were faithful, Pandrosus was, and Herse was. The other, Aglaurus, called her sisters timid creatures, unbound the fastenings, and saw the baby lying inside the box, and there beside him a snake stretched out full length. Of course I went and told the goddess. Lovely thanks I got for that. She threw me out and put me below the owl. My punishment should warn all birds. Keep out of trouble and be quiet. Maybe you think I asked for this, and Pallas did not come looking for me? Well, go ask her. She would admit the truth for all her anger. I was a princess in the land of Phocis. A famous king, Coronius, was my father, and I had many suitors. Do not give me that look of scorn. Why, everybody knows it. My beauty was my ruin. I was walking along the shore one day in my own fashion, slowly, almost on tiptoe over the sand, and the god of ocean saw me, and his passion blazed up. He found he wasted time in pleading, in using flattering words. So then he offered force and came after me. I ran, I wearied in the soft sand, I called on gods and mortals for help, and never a mortal came to help me. A virgin goddess, pitying a virgin, brought help to me. I held my arms to heaven. My arms began to darken with soft plumage. I tried to pull the cloak from off my shoulders. The cloak was plumage, and I could not move it. I tried to beat my naked breasts, and found I had neither breasts nor beating hands. I ran, not as I used to, through the holding sand, but over it, just over it, and rising, airborne, unsullied, given to Minerva. That's Athena in Roman. Much good it does me. Now Nectimene has taken my place. Another sinful woman changed into bird, and everybody knows Nectimene was sleeping with her father. And still her guilt compels her, though a bird, to shun the light, the sight of men. She hides her shame in darkness. She is always driven out of the shining sky. The raven answered, That ought to teach you something. As for me, I find it very silly. And he kept going, and told Apollo he had seen Coronis lying beside some young Thessalonian fellow. The god lost countenance and color also. His laurel crown came sliding off his forehead. He dropped his lyre, and, as his anger mounted, he took the bow, he bent it, fired the arrow into the breast he had felt against his own. And the girl groaned, and tugging at the arrow, saw her white body redden with crimson stain, and cried, The punishment was due, Apollo, but giving birth was also due. I might have brought forth my son. Now 2 of us are dying. And that was true. Cold death took body and spirit. Too late, alas, lover and god repented the cruel vengeance, and hated both his anger and willingness to listen, and most of all, hated the bird for telling. He hates the bow, hates quiver, arrows, and the aiming hand. He lifts the fallen girl, as if caressing might bring her back to life. He tries to conquer her fate beyond all help or hope of healing, even by the healing god. And when he saw the pyre made ready for the final burning, he sighed and moaned. No god can weep. His moaning was pitiful, almost like the mourning lowing made by an animal mother when her calf goes down before the butcher's smashing hammer. Over her breast, unfeeling now, Apollo pours incense, gives the last embrace, does all that can be done, and never seems worth doing. One thing he could not bear, that his own son die in that fire unborn, and so he took him out of the mother's womb, and took the baby to the cavern of the Centaur, to Chiron's keeping. As for the raven sitting there and hoping for some reward for bringing a truthful story, all he received was the divine injunction to keep away from all white birds forever. So we've got some origins of birds, some changing of colors, some changing of people into birds. Changes. Let's see, I think I'm going to skip over this next part. Maybe this next part as well. Okay. Yeah, like I said, not all of these stories are super famous or Chiron the Backstabber. Chiron the Centaur. So let's go on ahead to talk about Europa. Yeah, it's not very long either. And again, in that story that we just read, I don't know if you caught that, but so Apollo is once again in love with a mortal girl who is not interested in him, and in his sadness to hear that she has slept with a mortal boy, Apollo, the blood drains from his face, he loses color, the laurel wreath falls from his head. So even in the universe, this is after what happened with Daphne. So he should have learned a lesson there, didn't, and is still pursuing mortal maidens who have no interest in him. So Mercury was doing some stuff down on Earth, and back in heaven he found his father waiting. Jove had an errand for him. He did not say love was the reason for it, love when it comes to Jupiter, but simply told him, My son, my ever-willing faithful servant, be quick, glide back again, go down to Sidon. You will find a herd, the kings of cattle grazing along the mountains. Drive them to the seashore. There was no delay. The herd was quickly driven from the hillside to the seashore, where the king's daughter used to go playing with her Tyrian comrades. Do majesty and love go well together or linger in one dwelling? Hardly. Jove put down his heavy scepter, the great father, great ruler of the gods, whose right hand wields triple-forked lightning, and whose awful nod makes the world tremble, put aside his might, his majesty, and took upon himself the form of a bull. Went lowing with the heifers over the tender grass, showy and handsome, the color of snow, which never a foot has trodden, never a raindrop sullied. The great muscles bulged on the neck, the dewlaps hung to the chest. The horns were small, but every bit as perfect as if a sculptor made them, and as shining as any jewel, and the eyes and forehead offered no threat, and the great gaze was peaceful. And the king's daughter looked at him in wonder, so calm, so beautiful, and feared to touch him, at first, however mild, and soon little by little got over her fear, and was bringing flowers to hold toward that white face, and he, the lover, gave kisses to the hands held out, rejoicing in the hope of later, more exciting kisses. Is it time? Not quite. He leaps, a little playful, over the green grass, or lays the snowy body on the yellow sand, and gradually the princess loses all fear, and he lets her pat his shoulder, twine garlands in his horns, and she grows bolder, climbs on his back, of course, all unsuspecting, and he rises ever so gently, and slowly edges from the dry sand toward the water, further and further, and swimming now with the girl, trembling a little and looking back to the land, her right hand clinging tight to one horn, and the other resting easy along the shoulder, and her flowing garments filling and fluttering in the breath of the sea wind. So Jupiter has caught sight of one Europa, goes down there, turns into a bull to hang out with her flocks, and he's a magnificent bull, like really, really, really pretty bull. And he's playful and he's nice, and he sort of like urges her to climb on top, and then he goes swimming off into the water, and she's like, what's going on here? Oh, cats. I do get jealous watching Janelle and Andy, because their cats are so much nicer than mine. My cat has her moments, but they are few and far between. Yeah, we're mostly just afraid of her. She's right there. She's not too far away either. All right, and that was the end of book 2. So the book endings and beginnings are kind of arbitrary, because we're going to continue that story. That's obviously not the end of it. They go swimming into the ocean, but then what happens? Where's the change? Although Jupiter changed into the form of a bull, but that's not enough. We're going to get more changes than that. Book 3 starts off with the story of Cadmus, which is a good one. Ooh, and then we have Actaeon. Oh, this is a good chapter. Semele. What? Tiresias. Oh, okay. These are really good in this chapter, in this book. Book 3, starting with the story of Cadmus. And now the god... Oh, and just remembered. When it talks about when he's as bull form seducing Europa, gave kisses to the hands held out, rejoicing in hope of later, more exciting kisses. Smooth. And now the god put off the bull's disguise, revealed himself at last. They had reached the shores of Crete, when the girl's father, King Agenor, unknowing what had happened to his daughter, ordered his son, named Cadmus, to go and find her, threatening exile as a punishment for failure in that single action, showing devotion toward his daughter, toward his son, harsh wickedness. And Cadmus roamed the world in vain, for who is good enough detective to catch Jove cheating? Well, a lot of people, actually. Well, mainly the gods. roamed the world in vain, and became an exile, leaving both fatherland and father's anger. He sought Apollo's oracle, a suppliant asking what land to live in, and Apollo replied, "In lonely lands there will come to meet you a heifer, one who has never worn the yoke, nor drawn the curve of a plow. Follow the creature till she lies down to rest, and there establish the city walls, and call the land Boeotia." Scarcely had Cadmus left the sacred cavern when he saw the heifer, moving slow, unguarded, wearing no mark of servitude. He followed slowly and silently adored Apollo for showing him the way. And now the heifer had passed Cephisus and Panopian acres, halted and raised her handsome head, with horns widespread and lowed, and looked back at those people coming behind, and kneeled, and let her side sink down in the green meadowland. And Cadmus gave thanks and kissed that foreign ground, and greeted the unknown fields and mountains. Let's see. Oh, okay, cool. For libation to Jove, he ordered serving men to go find living water for the sacrifice. An ancient forest stood there, undespoiled by any axe, and in its midst a cave thick set with bushes. Tightly fitted stones made a low archway, under which the water poured from abundant springs, and there a serpent, sacred to Mars, was dwelling. Remember, Mars here is Ares, the god of war. His crest was gold, his eyes flashed fire, his body swelled with poison. 3 darting tongues he had, 3 rows of teeth. The men of Cadmus reached this grove, ill-omened. Their lowered vessels broke the water's silence, answered by hissing, for the long head, thrusting, reached out from the long darkness of the cavern. The urns sank through the water, and the men felt blood run cold, and limbs turn weak and tremble. Twisting his scaly coils in writhing loops, curving in undulant arcs and semicircles, the serpent lifts himself erect. He towers, half of him anyway, as high as huge as the great serpent of the constellations. The whole wood lies beneath him, and he strikes, coils, or constricts. All the men are victims. It makes no difference what they try, to fight, to run, to stand, too numb for either. High noon arrived with shadows at their shortest. Cadmus began to wonder. What had happened? Why had they not come back? He went to find them. For shield he had a lion's skin, for weapon a lance with shining point of steel, a javelin, and his best armor, a courageous spirit. He entered the dark wood. He saw the bodies. He saw the great victorious serpent gloating, licking the wounds with bloody tongue. He cried, "I will avenge your death, poor faithful bodies, or be your comrade in that death." So saying, with all the strength he had, he raised a boulder, lifted it shoulder high, and hurled it from him with force that would have shattered walls and towers. But the serpent took no wound at all, protected by scales of iron and the skin's dark hardness. Not hard enough, however, for the javelin, which pierced the middle of the back, the steel biting down into the middle of the belly. He is wild with pain, twists back his head. He sees the wounds, he bites the spear shaft, and he loosens wood from the iron, but the iron stays there, stuck in the spine. His rage is more than doubled. The throat is swollen, veins stand out, the jaws froth with white poison, and the sound of metal clangs from the ground as the great scales rasp across it. The smell of his breath infects the noisome air. He coils, he writhes, he straightens, like a beam or battering ram, comes on like a flooding river, sweeping the trees before it. Cadmus yields only a little, holding up against him the lion's skin and jabbing with the spear point. Maddened, the serpent snaps the steel and catches the point between his teeth. The poisonous mouth begins to dribble blood, and the green grass is sprayed another color, but the wound is slight, the monster yielding, going with it. And Cadmus, following hard, keeps pointing, pressing, backing the serpent up against an oak tree, pinning him there, and the oak tree bends, protesting under that weight and all that furious lashing. And as he stood there gazing at his victim, a voice was heard, coming from where he knew not, but he could hear it saying, Why, O Cadmus, stare at the serpent slain? You also someday will be a serpent for mortal men to stare at. So again, we get an ancient source, very worried about mortality and transformations and things. But for a long time he stood there, pale and trembling and cold with apprehension. But a helper, Minerva, through the air descending, came and stood beside him, and she gave him orders to plow the earth, to sow the teeth of the serpent, which would become the seed of future people. Cadmus obeyed. He opened the long furrows and sowed the mortal seed. Could you believe it? The covered earth broke open, and the clods began to stir, and first the points of spears rose from the ground, then colored plumes and helmets, shoulders of men and chests, arms full of weapons, a very harvest of the shields of warriors, the opposite of the way a curtain rises, showing feet first, then knees and waists, and bodies and faces last of all. That's kind of a cool image. So this is fully grown, armored and armed men rising from the earth, from the, coming out. So first you see the top of their spears and their helmets working down. But if you have a curtain or a sheet or whatever with a figure on it, and you lift it up, it goes the other way. You see the feet first, and it moves up the body as you lift it up. That's cool imagery. Assuming, you're holding it by the top and you're lifting it. Or you're unfurling it. Yeah, that makes sense. If it's weighted at the bottom, so you... Yeah. Cadmus was frightened by this new menace, got his weapons ready, and heard a cry, one of the earthborn people calling out, "Do not arm! Keep out of this, our civil warfare!" As he spoke, he struck one of his brothers, and himself was murdered by a dart flung far, whose thrower too went down dying as soon as living. And that madness raged through them all. The sudden brothers perished by wounds they gave each other. And the earth, their mother, felt their short-lived blood upon her, warm from their brief existence. Only 5 were left at last, and one of these, Echion, let fall his weapons as Minerva ordered, asked peace, and won it from the other brothers, and Cadmus found them helpers and companions in the building of the town Apollo promised. That was the city Thebes, and now the exile might seem a happy man. Venus and Mars were parents of his bride, and there were children who turned out well, and children of the children grown to maturity. But always, always, a man must wait the final day, and no man should ever be called happy before burial. That's pretty brutal, right? But it's the idea that you could consider yourself the happiest, luckiest person on earth, but unless you die right then, things could get a lot worse for you. The gods could turn against you. Everything could end up going very badly. So we have Cadmus fighting against this gigantic dragon. We have some really interesting details about the dragon. Essentially, it has three sets of mouth parts, but it only has one head. It comes out through the water from underneath rocks. Cadmus is able to slay it, and then he sows its teeth in the ground, which grow. Again, these men, these dragonborn, earthborn men who are fully armed and armored, they fight themselves until the last few ask for peace. So continuing on with the family of Cadmus, this is the story of Actaeon. And like I said, this is a good one. Ooh, and we get a couple fun elements in this one. So the family of Cadmus. One of these grandsons was the lad Actaeon, first cause of Cadmus's sorrow. On his forehead horns sprouted, and his hound dogs came to drink the blood of their young master. In the story, you will find Actaeon guiltless. Put the blame on luck, not crime. What crime is there in error? So interesting little bit here, we get a little preview, a little trailer about what's going to happen, and definitely spoilers. So yeah, we're going to see a horrific change and what comes out because of it. There was a mountain on whose slopes had fallen the blood of many kinds of game. High noon, short shadows, and Actaeon at ease and friendly telling his company, "Our nets and spears drip with the blood of our successful hunting. Today has brought us luck enough. Tomorrow we try again. The sun god, hot and burning, is halfway up his course. Give up the labor, bring home the nets." And they obeyed his orders. So young Actaeon is a hunter. He goes and hunts on the mountainside. Excuse me. There was a valley there, all dark and shaded, with pine and cypress, sacred to Diana. Gargaphy, its name was, and it held deep in its inner shade a secret grotto, made by no art, unless you think of nature as being an artist. Out of rock and tufa she had formed an archway, where the shining water made slender watery sound, and soon subsided into a pool and grassy banks around it. The goddess of the woods, when tired from hunting, came here to bathe her limbs in the cool crystal. She gave her armor-bearer spear and quiver and loosened bow. Another's arm received the robe laid off. 2 nymphs unbound her sandals, and one, Crocale, defter than the others, knotted the flowing hair. Others brought water, Psacas, Phyali, Nephili, and Ranis, pouring it out from good-sized urns, as always. But look! While she was bathing there, all naked, Actaeon came. With no more thought of hunting till the next day, wandering, far from certain, through unfamiliar woodland till he entered Diana's grove, as fate seemed bound to have it. And when he entered the cool, dripping grotto, the nymphs, all naked, saw a man, and beat their breasts and screamed, and all together gathered around their goddess, tried to hide her with their bodies. But she stood above them, taller by head and shoulders. As the clouds grow red at sunset, as the daybreak reddens, Diana blushed at being seen, and turned aside a little from her close companions, looked quickly for her arrows, found no weapon except the water, but scooped up a handful and flung it in the young man's face and over the young man's hair. Those drops had vengeance in them. She told him so. "Tell people you have seen me, Diana, naked. Tell them if you can." She said no more, but on the sprinkled forehead, horns of the long-lived stag began to sprout. The neck stretched out, the ears were long and pointed, the arms were legs, the hands were feet, the skin a dappled hide, and the hunter's heart was fearful. Away in flight he goes, and going, marvels at his own speed, and finally sees reflected his features in a quiet pool. "Alas!" he tries to say, but has no words. He groans, the only speech he has, and the tears run down cheeks that are not his own. There is one thing only left him, his former mind. What should he do? Where should he go? Back to the royal palace? Or find some place of refuge in the forest? Fear argues against one, and shame the other. And while he hesitates, he sees his hounds. Blackfoot, Trail Chaser, Hungry, Hurricane, Gazelle, and Mountain Ranger, Spot and Sylvan, Swift Wingfoot, Glen, wolf-sired, and the bitch Harpy, with her 2 pups half-grown, ranging beside her, Tigress, another bitch, Hunter and Lanky, Chopjaws and Soot and Wolf, with the white marking on his black muzzle, Mountaineer and Power, the killer, Whirlwind, Whitey, Blackskin, Grabber, and others it would take too long to mention. Arcadian hounds and Cretan-born and Spartan. So these are some names that we get in Ovid of ancient dogs. So some of the things that ancient people would have named their animals. So obviously we have names for the coloration of their fur. We have nature names like Hurricane, naming animals after other animals like Gazelle, which is interesting. Tigress, wolf. Yeah, then like hurricane and whirlwind, and then just like interesting random things like power, and then several very aggressive names in there. Let's see, what was it? Chop Jaws, the Killer, Grabber. Yeah. Neat. Ancient animal names. The whole pack, with the lust of blood upon them, came baying over cliffs and crags and ledges where no trail runs. Actaeon, once pursuer on this very ground, is now pursued, fleeing his old companions. He would cry, "I am Actaeon! Recognize your master!" But the words fail, and nobody could hear him, so full the air of baying. First of all, the Killer fastens on him, then the Grabber. Then Mountaineer gets hold of him by a shoulder. These three had started last, but beat the others by a shortcut through the mountains. So they run him to stand at bay until the whole pack gathers, and all together nip and slash and fasten till there's no more room for wounds. He groans, making a sound not human, but a sound no stag could utter either, and the ridges are filled with that heartbreaking kind of moaning. Actaeon goes to his knees, like a man praying, faces them all in silence, with his eyes in mute appeal, having no arms to plead with, to stretch to them for mercy. His companions, the other hunting lads, urge on the pack with shouts, as they did always, and not knowing what has become of him, they call, "Actaeon! Actaeon!" each one louder than the others, as if they thought him miles away. He answers, hearing his name, by turning his head toward them, and hears them growl and grumble at his absence, calling him lazy, missing the good show of quarry brought to bay. Absence for certain he would prefer, but he is there, and surely he would rather see and hear the dogs than feel them. They circle him, dash in, and nip, and mangle, and lacerate, and tear their prey, not master. No master whom they know, only a deer. And so he died, and so Diana's anger was satisfied at last. Oof. So yeah, Actaeon is one of a series of very sad individuals in ancient stories who are punished by the gods really for no fault of his own. He was a hunter. In other stories, especially Greek stories, Actaeon he's a good dude. He honors the gods. He performs all the right sacrifices. He even honors Artemis, or here Diana. But because he accidentally walked in and saw the goddess naked, he suffers a horrible, terrible, and ironic fate, being turned into a deer and torn apart by his own hunting dogs. Yeah, brutal, right? So I think we'll stop there in the text for today. Are you all enjoying listening and lurking, hopefully? So coming up in this chapter, I know, right? It's pretty brutal. So after this one, and this, like I said, we have Semele, Tiresias. Tiresias is cool because it's, I don't know if you are familiar with the name Tiresias. He's the blind seer. He's like a wise man, and he shows up in a lot of Greek stories, especially Greek tragedies. He's usually wandering around, and they'll bring him in and say, "Hey, what's really going on here?" And he'll say, "Oh, it's this," or "Oh, watch out for that," or "Oh, I can't really tell you because you'll be real sad." But there's, separate from all of that, separate from all of his wisdom and being able to see through things, famously he's in the play Oedipus Rex. He's brought in when Oedipus is like, why is everybody suffering under this plague? I don't understand it. And Tiresias comes and looks around and is like, you know what? You should just go, like, don't ask any more questions, just leave. And Oedipus is like, no, tell me what's going on. Tiresias is like, I really don't want to. You'd really be happier if you just left and didn't know what was happening. And Oedipus, of course, says, no, you have to tell me. And Tiresias is like, no, I really don't want to say. But anyway, there's a separate story about Tiresias that's reported here. And I'll just give you a little tease because I don't want to ruin it. But it has to do with sexual pleasure. Let's put it that way. So tune in on Monday for that. Later on in this chapter, we're also going to get Echo and Narcissus, which is such a great story. A little bit of a longer one. Pentheus and Bacchus. Yeah, good stuff, good stuff, good stuff. And that'll be the rest of book 3. Cool. So today's Thursday. Tonight I will be on with the Warhammer show on Hyper. So tune in for that at 6 p.m. Pacific tonight. Yeah, if you watched the RPG last night, you'll have some clues as to what might happen tonight. Still finalizing some details, but it should be good. Same players as usual, but I'll be remotely zooming in. Tomorrow we'll look at some figures, keep working on some Robotech probably, maybe some other stuff. And Rabbit Wombat, I'm sorry to hear that. Hopefully you're doing better today. And yeah, then Saturday, Homebuddies stream right here. I'm working on something cool. Don't have all the details finalized, so don't want to say too much. In other news, we've got a bunch of new soaps coming out for Halloween that are really, really cool. We'll be previewing some of them very, very soon. If you could zoom in, you could probably see some of them back there on that table. But yeah, some really, really cool. Some Halloween related designs, some just sort of horror designs. So things I'm pretty excited about. So keep an eye out for that. Here, you know what? Let me. If you're unfamiliar, my wife's soap making business. Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that, Rabbit Wombat. Definitely get rest. Heal up. It's not the virus, is it? Isn't that crazy, right? Like, we could be totally quarantined like my family is. And then you'll have a little tickle in your throat and you'll cough a couple times. You're like, oh my God, do I have the virus? But hopefully it's just tiredness. Oh yeah, Rabbit Wombat. Just wait a couple more days, and we'll have announcements. We are all in this house very, very tired. We have an insane sleeping schedule or lack of sleep schedule. But my wife is churning out these soaps. It's crazy. Wanting to have some really good stuff for this holiday season. We also want to get all this stuff out of the way now a little bit in advance for Halloween, because then we have another big push that we're going to be doing at the end of the year. So a whole crazy secret project I can't talk about, but it is also very exciting. So yeah, work and stress will definitely wear you down. I think that's all I got. I think that's it. I'm gonna go take care of the kids for the day while Chris works on said soaps, and then I'll be getting ready for tonight. Let's see, bring up Twitch here. We haven't done a raid in a while. Is anybody important on? Anybody worth sending you awesome, amazing people? Mute myself. Come on, load it up. I don't know, this may not be working. Not a lot of people on right now. All right, well, anyway, Easy come, easy go. Have a great rest of your day, everybody. Again, tune in tonight on Hyper RPG if you're into some Warhammer action. Otherwise, I'll see you back here for figures and a nice, cool, low-key stream tomorrow. Okay, bye-bye. See you, everybody.